So the lab reception, that functionality has now been put in here for the retail operators, or all the operators, not just the retail. Retail's received tons of stuff, but so do EIs from the Grow. And so we're going to go right to a retail here. I sent some stuff. It's obviously not a real world representation because we have a lab and a reg council and everything on here, but we sent some stuff from the EI this morning to the retail. And we'll toggle this on Monday like we always do from webinars. And then I think Miles or Robin or somebody's putting in a link to the chat here. And this is a link of the knowledge base. We've had plenty of time to get this ready as Robin has worked with the state to get approval for us to release this. And that's given, Miles and I time to check the knowledge base. So check that link. And if you want to read along with us, but in the end, it's super fast. So for instance, you'll go into here, you'll go to supply chain. Notice I didn't go to purchase order first. Now, of course, if you make the purchase order, when you're actually making the order, which some people do, some people don't, as far as the system goes, you certainly don't have to have a purchase order, ahead of time before you make a request for something, right? So sometimes the workflow is a sales order comes in, you already know what that is, you know it's coming in, and then you create the purchase order and then do the supply chain mapping. Obviously, you might create the purchase order days in advance in the system, so you have it there. If that's not the case, we have purchase order auto create for operators now. So this one, I always do the date search. Field unfreezes. There's no purchase order here, even though there's a crap load of purchase orders from our sample, but I haven't created one for this. So, but you can still map to a purchase order that you've created separately ahead of time, 5 minutes ahead or 3 days ahead. But you can also now auto create purchase order. This will auto create the purchase order. You'll never even actually see the purchase order unless you go back to the supply chain screen. We'll look at that, or rather the supply chain area. But it also has, now this will not auto create products like I mentioned for the lab, where it's a taxonomy of category, subcategory, unit of measure, since that would be a mess if everybody just only had those on their labels. We would have any idea what they're buying. But here you can see one of these is filled into the product automatically, even though there's a ton of other options, and the other one is not filled in. It's because I have already brought in this strain and I have not yet brought over this strain. So after I map this to the 13 dogs, or if I have to create it and then make it, fine. But after I've brought in something one time, then it will remember this. So there's a memory, and the next time these will just show up in here. And if it's brought into the wrong item, I can still change it, and we've made sure to make the logic always look at the most recently map thing versus the first map thing. So any changes you make that you receive then will always be the last map thing, and will be what show up next time in the drop down memory wise. Now, once I hit go, it brings me right into the transfer, and I can just nail the inventory location and send it in. But I do have the purchase order here. So remember, we had the whole thing about the cost, and how before sometimes the costs were coming from the sales order versus the purchase order that you've created. Well, this still gives you the ability to edit the cost of the purchase order, so you can really quickly create a purchase order this way, and then you can jump back in here to the supply chain purchase orders, and you'll see that our latest purchase order is today. This is the purchase order that just got created in the back end from that mapping page. And then, this is modifiable because we haven't brought anything in yet. And then we can bring it in from here. Or rather, you'd have to go to supply chain mapping and then, receive the transfer, map it to the purchase order. But you can, in some ways, create the purchase order that then you modify, create it really quickly, or just create it and skip right past it and go to the inventory receipt. And that's the new feature there. So that'll be available everywhere. So it'll be easier on transfers from Grow to EI because like, you know, Grow or Processor, because those share the same product list. So when the Grow makes a product, it's already existing for the read. Now that doesn't mean it'll automatically map to that. The system makes you map it the first time, but then after that, like, so you'll never probably have to create new products receiving at the EI unless you receive into a different item master altogether. But then it'll remember subsequent receptions. Well, thanks everybody.